All right, now before we continue to add more geometry, we're gonna refine what we have just a bit. So I'm gonna select an edge and then shift click the next edge in the sequence, and then I'm gonna use Flow Connect. So I like Flow Connect because what it does is it actually attempts to smooth out the geometry as it adds detail. So I just want to add a little bit in a couple of spots so that as we continue on, we're going to be able to have enough detail in the mesh to do what we want to do. So for now, that should be good. So I just want to look around a little bit here and figure out really the best place to connect this up. All right, so in order to do what I want to do, I'm actually going to take this vertex here and target weld it down to this spot. Now, it's going to get a little messy here for a second. Well, no, we don't want to do that. What I want to do before I do that, we're going to select across here, and I'm going to flow connect there as well. Just need a little bit of extra geometry to get this to work. All right, what that's going to allow me to do is to take this vertex here and target weld it up. So we're just going to hit target weld and drag it over. All right, now let's move that back into position. So here we're just going to kind of look around and actually adjust the flow of several of these to kind of clean that up. All right, now we can continue the flow of the geometry wrapping under the pectoralis muscle and how it overlaps the bicep muscle. So we want to tuck this back in under a little further and help to encourage the look of how that pec muscle sits over the top of the bicep muscle. Now as we go ahead and continue, so let's add another edge right in here. So we flow connect there. And that's going to again allow us, as we look at bridging across some of these other edges, it's going to help us to keep our quads and to keep everything flowing the way we want it to flow. Now as I bridge, 2 segments for now is going to be good. We can always add more. So let's bring those down a touch, keep all of this nicely rounded as we go. So I'm always just looking around the mesh from various angles, trying to figure out where I can smooth things out and keep the mesh flowing as nicely as possible. Let's spread this out a bit. And then, as I keep looking around, I really just want to keep watching for how I can round out the shape and make sure that everything feels like it's running pretty smoothly around the mesh. Right now we should actually be able to take this edge and bridge it back to here. And because we had moved this vertex, now these two vertices are no longer on top of each other. So as long as we can see them both, let's Alt W to make that full screen. I'm going to target weld this one down to that one. And this guy we're going to leave there for now. All right, let's look at our turbo smooth. All right, the flow underneath the pec muscle up into the deltoid is good. We're going to have to do a little bit more work here in the front of the deltoid to get that kind of to come forward and make sure it looks like it's staying over the top of the bicep muscle. But the flow underneath the pec up into that deltoid is the most important part for now. So as long as we've got that flow going the way we want it to, everything else should fall into line. All right, we're going to add a little more detail across the back in a couple of spots so that we've got a bit more room to add some detail into the side of the body here. So I'm just looking around, trying to get a good idea of where we should join this up. So in order to avoid triangles, we may have a triangle that we have to work out of the mesh, but working triangles out is really not too big of a deal. Let's just start with the bottom 3 here. And the bottom 3 here. So we're going to bridge, we're going to add 2 segments. We're going to start with that. We can always add a little bit more, move around what we've got. So we're going to use that to help define the lat. Bridge from here to here. For that one, we only want a single. And then we can bridge from here to here, here to here. Again, with just a single. All right, so we got that in, no triangles, but I would prefer the flow underneath the pectoralis muscle here to come all the way up into the bicep muscle. So we need to rework a little of this in a couple of spots. So if I grab that, it goes all the way around the arm, which in and of itself is good, but if we grab this one, where does it go? Across and under and up into the back. Now, that in and of itself isn't so bad either. Let's turn on Turbo Smooth and see where this is going. All right, that's really not too bad. Let's go into Vertex though. Turn off the Turbo Smooth. See, as we move this into the side of the mesh here, we're just looking to kind of get this to help define both the rib cage and the lat muscle. So this set of vertices really pretty much is like the front edge of the lat muscle, kind of the side of the rib cage. So I just want to keep looking around and making those adjustments to find that volume. Shift Z undoes a viewport change. So now, again, I'm just continuing to define that lat muscle. And I'm trying to watch all my viewports to see really where that flow is going. So we're going to move these back up into the back a little bit farther. And allow this set to kind of be the extreme edge of that lat muscle. So that means we're going to pull this back a little bit farther and tuck those into the body a bit to help visually define how the lat muscle sits on the back. That's actually not doing too bad. The flow underneath the pec up into the arm looks all right. I think we can define that a little bit more, but for now, I think we can work with that. So I think at some point we're going to end up going in here and spinning some edges and correcting that flow so that it actually flows up underneath the pec muscle up into the arm. I think it'll end up working out a little bit better and ensuring that things are going to pull and stretch correctly once we rig. The flow is just not quite right now. So after we fine tune just a little bit more here about how this all fits around the side of the mesh, we're going to go back and we're going to correct that flow. So we will do that in just a minute. All right, for now, most of this is actually looking pretty good. The flow through the front of the body here actually works pretty nicely. I'm going to round off the form just a little bit more in a couple spots. So as we add detail, we do always want to make sure that we're going back in and adjusting and refining the position of that detail so we don't end up with anything that's actually not where we want it. All right, so next we're going to be correcting the flow back up into that arm. All right, now to correct that flow, this should actually be pretty straightforward. We're going to just select these 3 polygons right here and we're going to delete them. What I then want to do is to bridge this edge here over to the edge that's running underneath the pectoralis muscle. That's going to get that flow going out into the arm and underneath the pec. So we're going to use the bridge tool. And then since we only have a single segment here, we need another one to be able to connect the 2 vertices here. So we'll OK that. And then back to my vertex, and I'm just going to target weld this vertex up. So we'll just target weld from there to there. And then we can very simply bridge, I don't want that one back there, these four edges together. And that's going to fix our flow. So now when I go to bridge, I do want to make sure that I'm at a single segment because I don't want that flowing all the way through. And that should help. Now, if we do want to, we can actually take something like this, throw a flow connect in there, and then we've got a bit more detail to work with back here when we get up into that armpit. So we can bring that up a bit farther now. And then we can bring down some of the mass of the bicep and upper arm so that as it kind of inserts here, we can get a bit more of a feeling of the flow and overlap of those muscles. So bring this a little forward, bring this up. So again, now it's really all about trying to make sure that the flow and the feeling of the overlap between those muscle masses all works together. So we want to make sure that bicep looks and feels like it's tucked in underneath the pec muscle. So we may want to bring both of these out a bit more. And then we'll emphasize the front of the deltoid here a little more. And then in order to get all of this to have the detail that we want, we may need to actually add another whole segment all the way through here. I think for now we can avoid that in the hopes that we aren't going to need that much more detail everywhere. Especially if this is going to end up at some point being kind of a low poly game mesh. We want to keep the detail that we have in here minimized as much as possible for as long as possible. We just need to make sure that the flow of everything goes where we want it to so that we can actually get the musculature to pull and stretch correctly when we're at the point of rigging. Yeah, that works a whole lot better. The way that deltoid now comes in and feels like it sits underneath there definitely works better. See, our turbo smooth is only set to 1. Let's set it to 2 and take a look at that. So we can see a little bit more of the detail of how those two pieces fit together. Now, this in and of itself, as far as the material on our object, isn't really helping us. So we're going to go to the material editor and we're going to make just a plain old standard material. The standard material I'm going to make a little bit darker gray. I'm going to give it just a touch of shininess and we'll set the self-illumination to about 20. Now, all that's going to do is make it so that the shadows on the object aren't pitch black. So we'll assign it to our object, and then when we render, we'll see we can actually see that detail a little bit better. We don't have pure black shadows, but the shine helps us to see the muscle detail a bit more. So now the way that the three muscle groups here actually overlap and interact with each other feels a lot more accurate and a lot more realistic. Simply just by deleting a couple polygons and adjusting the flow. All right, in this one, we're going to add a little bit more to the back. So we're going to continue to extend down the trapezius muscle as well as the lat muscle. So the trapezius, we want to actually bring toward the center line here a little further. So we're just going to go to the edge subobject so I can get those edges before we move them. All right, so I'm going to shift drag that whole center over. And we're going to use make planar X as well as right-clicking on the X there to make sure that that's in the very center line of our mesh. Now, because the spine itself is indented a bit from where that muscle mass should be, we want to bring that back in a little bit farther. Now, that may also mean that here we want to bring this out a bit more to help emphasize the fact that it's got some mass to it. But now we want to go and we're going to take a couple edges here and we're going to shift drag them down. So I'm going to go to my back view and I'm going to shift drag down and we'll leave that right about there. And we'll go to the vertex level and we'll bring these way up. So the idea is that, again, I'm always trying to make sure that the volume of the muscles that I'm creating here flows with the overall volume of the mesh. At this point of the back, let's use soft selection. All of this should be a lot farther in. So we're going to grab that and we're going to move it so that all of this is starting to come forward. So with a little less area selected with my soft selection, I want to drag that back to align with the back line from the side view there. So now as we look around, we can see how that curves. That looks a little better. We got a little too crazy in a couple spots, but soft selection can do that. Bring these back over to more of the center line of where I want that trapezius muscle to be. Then we're going to grab those edges one more time, and we're going to shift drag them down. So as I drop them down here into position, I'm going to go to my vertex level, and we're going to move those back where they belong along the center line of the mesh. So now as we look around, we can kind of see they get a little out of whack. But we'll fix that. All right, we need to make sure that none of that's caving too far into the body. So I'm going to grab all those vertices and slide them back a little bit to help kind of keep my flow, my curvature moving correctly. That's definitely starting to look a little better as we look around it from multiple angles. All right, so now this one, we know that this vertex actually is in the very center of where we want our mesh to be. So when we drag that down, we're only going to drag it down on the z-axis. Then we're going to move it from the side to more or less be where we want it to be. Now, I do not want to touch that centerline vertex, but this outer one here, there's no problem at all with target welding that down. So as that one kind of gets into position there after the target weld, I'm looking at this kind of leftover triangle here and just trying to get a good idea of where we want to go with that. All right, so that's going to work out. So now one more time, I want to shift drag that one down, move it back, and then I'm going to use target weld to target weld this vertex over to here. So again, we have all quads everywhere. And the flow of that trapezius muscle is working exactly down the back the way we want it to. Now we're going to work that lat muscle down just a little bit more before we move on. All right, so we're going to take these three, and we're just going to shift drag those down and over. Now from there, that's going to work just fine. It lines up pretty well with another polygon here, so we'll be able to bridge across. But we definitely want to go back and make some adjustments to some of these vertices. So the lat muscle follows along the back here and kind of curves around as everything kind of comes in toward that spine. So I want to try to recreate that as much as possible so that when we get to the point of rigging and animating, things are going to be able to be rigged so that they move the way the human body and the human skin is going to stretch. So if we hit bridge, we want to make sure that we only have a single segment in there. So that's starting to work out pretty nicely. Those back muscles are actually flowing pretty well. Let's grab these and bring them down one more time. All right, so we're not going to go too far with this for now. I actually want to bring, let's actually take these edges. We're going to use make planar on X, and then we're going to move that all the way over to the center line of the body. Now doing that, again, I've got quads everywhere, and I can just bridge right across, and again, maintaining quads. Don't grab the wrong edge. So there we go. Now we'll head on over, grab the bridge tool. So now we'll go back, and obviously these need to be pulled back into the body a bit more. But more importantly than any of that at this point is the fact that we're maintaining quads and following the flow of musculature. So we can see here, I'm going to grab a couple vertices right about there. We're going to turn soft selection back on and adjust our fall off so that we're really only pulling the center of the back into the mesh, and we're going to pull that back into the body. Increase my fall off a bit more. So I'm just adjusting both the fall off here and the vertices I have selected to get a nice smooth curve. And we want to follow that curve of the spine. So up here, we can bring this back out a little bit, hit that shoulder blade. So soft selection is really nice for this kind of stuff, where I kind of want to just gently move a region of the mesh without affecting everything and or needing to grab every vertex. So it allows me to kind of work a bit more subtly. Sometimes subtle is a very good thing. We just want to be nice and gentle as we make all these adjustments. Let's take a look at that. Now we're getting some nice feeling of the different back muscles, but everything is staying nice and aligned. All right, so that's good for the back muscles. We're going to connect that in just a bit.